Welcome to the deep dive. We're really glad you're here. So, when you picture a battle, I think there's this really pervasive cultural expectation of like chaos and steel,
Oh,
right?
absolutely. Total cinematic chaos.
Yeah, you hear the deafening war cries and you see the charging horses. The commander points his sword toward the horizon and yells for the charge.
Right. Blood and mud everywhere.
Exactly. It's a movie set. But then, you step into the world of actual foundational military strategy, and suddenly that whole movie set just gets dismantled piece by piece.
It really does. It's almost disappointing if you're looking for romance.
Right.
Uh,
Because we're looking at a reality that is, well, honestly, it's a spreadsheet. And today, the mission of our deep dive is to explore a foundational text that is, it's constantly quoted, right? But it's rarely deeply understood.
Oh, yeah. You see quotes from it on corporate posters all the time,
Yes. But today we're taking a magnifying glass to the very first chapter of Sun Tzu's The Art of War, a chapter simply titled Laying Plans.
which tells you right there it's about the prep work.
Right, we want to prove that the greatest military victories aren't won with swords. They are won with cold, unromantic math.
And, that math isn't just derived from a vacuum. I think it's crucial to set the stage here. The sources we're exploring today aren't just Sun Tzu's original maxims sitting, like, pristine on a page.
Yeah, the text is actually super layered, isn't it?
Extremely. We are looking at a document layered with centuries of fascinating, intense, and occasionally entirely contradictory commentary.
Right, from scholars and military commentators who try to decode his work.
Exactly. Men like Tu Yu, Wang Su, and Cheng Yu. These guys spent their entire lives trying to unpack this single chapter.
And these weren't just guys sitting in an ivory tower.
No, not at all. These were men operating in eras of dynastic collapse, relentless civil war. So for them, interpreting Sun Tzu wasn't some academic exercise to be debated in a university.
It was survival.
It was the desperate search for absolute truth in an environment that was built entirely on deception.
And that tension, between finding mathematical certainty in a world populated by liars, that is the central premise we are going to trace through this whole deep dive.
It really is the core of the whole thing.
Okay, let's unpack this, because Sun Tzu establishes the immense stakes of this search in his very first line. He states, quote, "The art of war is of vital importance to the state."
Which sounds obvious to us, but he's making a very specific point.
Right, and he immediately defines what vital importance actually means. He says it is a matter of life and death, a road either to safety or to ruin.
Yeah, and by framing it as a road to safety or ruin, he's basically grabbing the reader by the collar.
And historically, the reader would have been a king, right, or supreme commander.
Exactly. He is enforcing this idea right off the bat that warfare is not a game of honor. It's not a test of individual bravery. It is an existential science of survival.
So you can't just wing it.
No, absolutely not. Ignorance of this science isn't just like a professional oversight. It is literal death for your entire civilization. Because it's a science, it's governed by variables, and more importantly, it's governed by constants.
So if the alternative is total ruin, a commander needs an anchor. They need a methodology to read the board they're playing on before a single troop is even deployed.
Right. You have to know the rules of the game before you play.
And to do this, Sun Tzu introduces 5 constant factors that have to be calculated to determine the conditions in the field. But here's the thing, when you look at the first 2 of these 5 factors, they don't seem like math at all.
No, they sound very philosophical.
Yeah, they are surprisingly ethereal. He begins with something called the moral law, and then the second one is just heaven.
Which throws a lot of modern readers off.
Yeah.
But those first 2 factors force a commander to step back and analyze the invisible atmospheric forces governing a conflict.
Right. So let's look at the moral law first. The text notes that it's a principle of harmony. It's explicitly likened to the Tao of Lao Tzu in its moral aspect.
Yeah, and Sun Tzu claims this moral law is what causes the people to be in complete accord with their ruler.
Meaning they'll follow him regardless of their lives, right? Undismayed by any danger.
Exactly. Total buy-in.
But, our sources point out that commentators really struggled with translating the weight of this concept. Like, you might be tempted to just call it morale.
Oh, but morale is way too shallow a word for this.
Right. Morale fluctuates with the weather or, I don't know, the quality of breakfast that morning.
Exactly. If the coffee is bad, morale drops. But the moral law is described as this fundamental attribute of the ruler himself and the organizational alignment of the entire state.
I sort of look at it like total organizational alignment. Like when a modern team completely buys into a shared mission, when a population completely buys into the existential necessity of the state, they just don't fracture when danger appears.
That's a great analogy.
But looking at this from a commander's perspective, I do have a logistical doubt. Like, how do you actually manifest that? Is it just a charismatic aura, the ruler projects?
See, that is precisely where the historical commentators are so valuable.
Mm.
They sharpen this philosophical concept into a literal military weapon.
How so?
Well, Tu Yu quotes Wang Tzu on this exact mechanism, and it strips all the mystique away. Wang Tzu says, without constant practice, the officers will be nervous and undecided when mustering for battle.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and he goes on to say, without constant practice, the general will be wavering and irresolute when the crisis is at hand.
So the alignment is actually forged through physical repetition.
Is the psychology of drilling. Wang Tzu is arguing that this harmonious accord, this willingness to die without dismay, it doesn't come from a stirring speech on horseback.
It's not a movie monologue.
No, it requires relentless, monotonous work. You don't achieve the moral law without the sweat of practice. If the soldiers haven't put in the repetitions, the officers get nervous.
And the general wavers.
Exactly.
Yep.
And that philosophical complete accord just shatters the second the enemy vanguard appears over the hill. The physical repetition builds the psychological harmony. It removes the uncertainty that breeds panic.
That makes so much sense. It really grounds the concept perfectly. But then we get to the second ethereal constant, which is heaven. And this one seems to trigger an even larger debate among the commentators in our sources.
Oh, it really does.
Because Sun Tzu defines heaven practically. He says it signifies night and day, cold and heat, times and seasons.
Which is just the weather.
Right. But the source text notes that some later scholars try to make this huge, unnecessary mystery out of these two simple words. Why do commentators make an unnecessary mystery out of this?
Well, what you're seeing here is the historical tension between the poetic minds of civilian scholars and the pragmatic minds of military veterans.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, for instance, you have a commentator like Meng Shi. When he reads the word heaven, he describes it mystically as the hard and the soft, waxing and waning.
He elevates it to this poetic riddle about the nature of the cosmos.
Exactly, which sounds beautiful.
Which sounds beautiful, yeah, but is entirely useless to a guy trying to plan a march.
Exactly. And that is why Wang Xi, another commentator, steps into the text and essentially pushes Meng Shi aside. Wang Xi argues that what Sun Tzu means is simply the general economy of heaven.
Meaning what? Exactly.
He brings it back to the 5 elements, the 4 seasons, the wind, the clouds. He completely demystifies it.
But why is there such a fierce historiographical debate over something as obvious as the weather? I mean, it's just rain and snow.
Because treating the environment as a mystical force leads to fatalism.
Ah, I see.
Right? If heaven is a poetic mystery, you just accept whatever happens as the will of the gods. But if heaven is the general economy of meteorology, night and day, cold and heat, then it is a constant factor that can and must be calculated.
You can plan for it.
Exactly. Think about the massive historical disasters born from ignoring this constant. The Russian winter defeating Napoleon or Hitler wasn't a mystical waxing and waning.
No, it was a failure of calculation.
Precisely. You can have the greatest moral law in the world, but if you cannot calculate the brutal economy of freezing temperatures, you lose.
Which naturally connects heaven to the third constant factor, which is Earth. Because, I mean, the weather dictates the condition of the terrain, right?
Exactly.
So moving from the sky to the soil, the text shifts to the tangible realities a leader has to manipulate. Sun Tzu quickly outlines what Earth comprises. Distances, great and small, danger and security, open ground and narrow passes, and the chances of life and death.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, here is where we enter the physics of movement.
Mm-hmm.
Notice how these constants interact and compound.
Okay.
You have the moral law, so your troops are psychologically anchored. You have calculated heaven, meaning you know a storm is arriving in 2 days. But Earth dictates the reality of your maneuver.
Right, because you have to actually march somewhere.
Exactly. Are you marching across open ground, which increases your speed but leaves your flanks vulnerable? Or are you moving through a narrow pass, which provides security from a wider attack, but risks a total bottleneck if that predicted storm washes out the road?
It's all interconnected. And he attaches that incredibly stark phrase to Earth. He calls it the chances of life and death.
Yeah, it's chilling.
The terrain itself has a mortality rate. The ground you choose to stand on does as much fighting as your soldiers do.
That's a great way to put it.
So, okay, we have the troops aligned. The sky is calculated. The ground is measured. Now, the state requires the architect to hold all these elements together. The fourth constant factor is the commander.
Yes, the linchpin.
And here's where it gets really interesting, because this is where the text challenges our modern sensibilities. Sun Tzu states the commander stands for the virtues of wisdom, sincerity, benevolence, courage, and strictness.
And the commentators spend an immense amount of time dissecting this specific list,
Yeah.
largely because of what Sun Tzu deliberately leaves out.
Right.
Our sources note the commentators compare Sun Tzu's list of military virtues directly against the traditional 5 cardinal virtues of the Chinese.
Right. The traditional civilian virtues are humanity, uprightness of mind, self-respect, wisdom, and sincerity. But Sun Tzu intentionally takes uprightness of mind and self-respect and just throws them out. He replaces them with courage and strictness.
And he reshuffles the order entirely.
Yeah, he puts wisdom and sincerity at the very front.
This is a profound exploration into the ethics of command. Because if you think about it, a civilian society functions beautifully on uprightness and self-respect.
Treating neighbors fairly, maintaining your dignity, that sort of thing.
Right, adhering to polite social norms. But on a battlefield where the stakes are absolute ruin, those virtues are not just insufficient, they are liabilities.
Because uprightness implies a rigid adherence to moral purity that might actually cause you to hesitate when violence is required.
Precisely. Strictness and courage must override mere uprightness when thousands of lives are on the line.
Wow.
A commander needs the courage to make a horrific, sacrificial call, and the strictness to ensure that call is carried out without debate.
So the moral framework is just entirely different for a general.
Completely. A civilian is judged on how fairly they navigate daily life. A commander is judged solely on whether the army survives. And notice that wisdom is placed first.
Right. Why is that?
Wisdom is the raw intellect required to calculate heaven, earth, and the moral law. Sincerity is the unflinching honesty to see the board clearly and to dispense reward and punishment without bias.
And only after those are established does benevolence, like actually caring for your men, come into play.
Exactly,
Oh.
because benevolence without wisdom and strictness just produces a well-rested, highly fed army that gets slaughtered.
You basically have to be deeply cold to keep people alive.
It's a heavy burden.
Which brings us to the fifth and final constant factor, the mechanism that actually allows the commander's strictness to function: method and discipline.
The spreadsheet itself.
Yeah. Sun Tzu defines this as the marshaling of the army into its proper subdivisions, the graduations of rank among the officers, the maintenance of roads by which supplies may reach the army, and the control of military expenditure.
It is the absolute scaffolding of warfare. It is logistics.
Right. An army marches on its stomach and its spreadsheet. You can have a courageous commander, brilliant use of terrain, and harmonious troops. But if the graduations of rank are confused, so orders aren't relayed,
Or if military expenditure isn't controlled and you run out of silver to buy grain,
the whole enterprise just collapses. Sun Tzu doesn't romanticize war as just a clash of wills. He acknowledges it as an incredibly expensive, resource-heavy, bureaucratic undertaking.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So we had the 5 constant factors: moral law, heaven, earth, the commander, and method and discipline.
Okay.
Sun Tzu argues these 5 heads should be familiar to every general. He who knows them will be victorious. He who knows them not will fail.
But, knowing these concepts exist in theory is very different from actually deploying them.
Right. Application is everything.
If I am a commander sitting in my tent, staring at a map, I know I have to account for these 5 factors. But how do I actually quantify my moral law or my method and discipline against an enemy I can't even see yet? Like, how do you measure the abstract?
You need a diagnostic test. And Sun Tzu provides 1 through the 7 considerations. He demands that generals use the 5 constants as a basis of comparison against the enemy.
By asking 7 relentless questions.
Exactly. Through these questions, the abstract variables become measurable data points.
Okay, let's unpack the mechanics of this diagnostic test. I'll just rapidly list the comparative questions. The first one is, which of the 2 sovereigns is imbued with the moral law?
Meaning, who actually has the total existential alignment of their population? Who has done the relentless drilling we discussed earlier?
Right. Question 2. Which of the 2 generals has most stability? Question 3. With whom lie the advantages derived from heaven and earth?
Meaning, who holds the high ground and whose supply lines are going to freeze first?
Exactly. Question 4 asks, on which side is discipline most rigorously enforced? Question 5. Which army is stronger?
And I want to pause on that one
Yeah.
because the commentator Mai Yaochin notes that strength isn't just about muscle mass here.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it means morally as well as physically. He calls it esprit de corps and quote-unquote big battalions.
But again, how do you measure something like esprit de corps?
Well, you measure it through the answers to the final two questions. Question 6. On which side are officers and men more highly trained?
Okay.
And question 7, which is perhaps the most critical for an army's psychology. In which army is there the greater constancy both in reward and punishment?
Oh, meaning who has the absolute unshakable certainty that merit will be rewarded and misdeeds will be summarily punished, regardless of rank or birth.
Exactly. And to truly understand how deeply the ancients weighed these considerations, particularly the enforcement of discipline and the constancy of punishment, we have to look at the historical commentary.
Yes, I was hoping we'd get to this.
Because Tumu provides a story about Cao Cao that perfectly illustrates the terrifying psychology of ancient discipline.
And I really want to spend some time on this deep dive within a deep dive because reading the Zhao Cao anecdote in the source notes genuinely shocked me.
It's an incredible story.
Cao Cao was this brilliant warlord who lived from roughly AD 155 to 220. And the commentary notes, he was such a strict disciplinarian that he laid down severe regulations against his army, injuring any standing crops while they were on the march.
Which is a highly practical logistical rule.
Right.
You do not want to antagonize the local peasant population because they are your source of intelligence.
Yeah.
And you absolutely cannot afford to destroy the local agriculture, which you might need to forage later.
Right. You don't burn your own grocery store. But during a march, Cao's own horse gets spooked. It shies into a field of corn and tramples the standing crop.
The supreme commander's horse.
Yes. The commander's horse has just broken the commander's ironclad law. So Cao Cao condemns himself to death.
He essentially orders his own execution over a traffic violation.
It's unbelievable. Now, he doesn't actually follow through with his own beheading, right? The commentary notes that he was persuaded to satisfy his sense of justice by cutting off his hair instead.
Right.
Which, to a modern listener, sounds almost comical.
It sounds like a cop-out.
Yeah, it sounds like a legal loophole, like, I must die for the corn. Wait, a haircut is fine. Excellent.
But that is where cultural context is so vital.
Right, because within the cultural context of ancient China, cutting one's hair was a profound mutilation. Hair was seen as a gift from one's parents. Cutting it was a massive symbol of disgrace and a severe loss of dignity.
Exactly. It was not a loophole. It was psychological theater of the highest order. Cao's own curt justification for the rule is recorded in the notes.
What does he say?
He simply states, quote, when you lay down a law, see that it is not disobeyed. If it is disobeyed, the offender must be put to death. He is actively managing consideration number 7.
By mutilating his own dignity in front of his troops.
Put yourself in the sandals of a foot soldier in that army. You watch the supreme commander, a warlord with literal life and death power over thousands, publicly humiliate and permanently scar himself simply because his horse stepped out of line.
Wow.
Are you as a low-ranking soldier ever going to break a regulation? Are you ever going to steal from a farmer or fall asleep on watch?
Not a chance. Because you know for an absolute fact that the law is a machine. There is no nepotism. There is no leniency for the elite.
And that brutal consistency feeds directly back into the moral law.
Oh, the harmony.
Yes. The troops find harmony with the ruler because the ruler is bound by the exact same strictness as the lowest private. It completely eradicates the resentment that usually breeds mutiny.
So when Sun Tzu asks, on which side is discipline most rigorously enforced? He is literally asking which commander is willing to cut off their own hair to prove the spreadsheet is real.
Exactly.
So an ancient general completes this diagnostic test. He calculates his own discipline, his training, and his morale against the enemies. What is the ultimate result of doing this math, like forecasting and consequences?
Well, Sun Tzu makes a staggering, almost arrogant claim here. He states, quote, by means of these 7 considerations, I can forecast victory or defeat.
He doesn't say he can make an educated guess.
No. He says he can forecast it with the mathematical certainty of an astronomer predicting an eclipse.
And we really have to remember the historical context of the text itself here, because this treatise wasn't written for general publication. It was composed expressly for the benefit of Sun Tzu's patron, Ho Lu, who was the king of the Wu state.
Right.
Sun Tzu is basically looking his king in the eye and delivering a brutally direct ultimatum regarding his fellow generals.
He tells King Ho Lu, quote, the general that hearkens to my counsel and acts upon it will conquer. Let such a one be retained in command. The general that hearkens not to my counsel nor acts upon it will suffer defeat. Let such a one be dismissed.
Dismiss. It is the ultimate display of confidence in the methodology. He's saying, my math works, keep the generals who use it, fire the ones who rely on instinct.
It underlines the absolute necessity of rigorous planning. There is no room in the Wu state for intuition that isn't backed by this specific data.
So we have spent all this time establishing what feels like an unyielding algorithm for war.
Right.
We have 5 constant factors. We have 7 unbending considerations. We have warlords publicly shaming themselves to maintain the absolute rigidity of the law.
It's very rigid.
Yeah, it feels as though war is just a fixed equation. You plug in the numbers and the victor is automatically generated.
But if the text stopped there, Sun Tzu would be nothing more than what the commentators call a bookish theoric.
A bookish theoric.
Yeah, a man who understands war on parchment but has never smelled blood.
Ah. But here is where Sun Tzu takes a hard left turn, proving his pragmatism. Because having spent the entire chapter demanding adherence to strict rules, he suddenly introduces the paradox of planning.
He introduces fluidity.
Yeah.
Sun Tzu writes, quote, while heading the profit of my counsel, avail yourself also of any helpful circumstances over and beyond the ordinary rules. According as circumstances are favorable, one should modify one's plans.
So he cautions the commander not to pin their faith entirely to abstract principles. And why? Because the enemy is not a static math problem. The enemy gets a vote.
What's fascinating here is Chang Yu's commentary. It illuminates this perfectly. Chang Yu notes that while the main laws of strategy can be stated clearly enough for everyone to study, you must be guided by the actions of the enemy when attempting to secure a favorable position in actual warfare.
All right.
You cannot run a flawless playbook in a vacuum. The moment the battle commences, the pristine variables shift. If you cling to the ordinary rules of your spreadsheet when the enemy makes a unique error, you forfeit the victory.
The source notes provide one of my absolute favorite historical examples to illustrate this tension between planning and improvisation. And it isn't a Chinese example, it's a Western one.
Which highlights just how universal these principles of command truly are.
Exactly. It involves the Duke of Wellington on the eve of the Battle of Waterloo.
Oh, the context of Waterloo makes this incredibly potent.
The stakes literally could not be higher for Europe. Napoleon Bonaparte is massed across the field. And the night before the battle, Lord Uxbridge, who is commanding the British cavalry, goes to the Duke of Wellington's quarters.
Oh.
Uxbridge wants to know Wellington's exact plans and calculations for the following morning. And Uxbridge's reasoning is entirely sound. He tells Wellington, listen, if you are killed tomorrow, I will suddenly find myself commander-in-chief. I will be unable to frame new plans in a critical moment. I need to know the playbook.
I mean, from a military standpoint, it is a perfectly reasonable, even responsible request from a subordinate officer.
Absolutely. Uxbridge is asking for the spreadsheet. But Wellington just listens quietly, and then he delivers this incredible punchline. He asks Uxbridge, who will attack the first tomorrow, I or Bonaparte?
Right.
Uxbridge replies, Bonaparte. And Wellington says, well, Bonaparte has not given me any idea of his projects, and as my plans will depend upon his, how can you expect me to tell you what mine are?
It is the ultimate embodiment of Sun Tzu's advice to modify one's plans according to favorable circumstances. Wellington is flatly refusing to commit to a rigid, abstract principle because he knows the entire battle hinges on reacting to the enemy's first moves.
But wait, this raises a fundamental contradiction that I have to push back on.
Go for it.
If Wellington is simply going to wait and see what Napoleon does, doesn't that render all the previous calculation useless? Like, why did Sun Tzu demand we spend half our lives calculating the 5 constant factors, measuring the terrain, and enforcing strict discipline if the ultimate answer on the eve of battle is just, we'll wing it based on the other guy?
See, that is the trap many fall into when reading military theory. People assume that improvisation is the opposite of planning.
Right.
In reality, the deep calculations don't prevent flexibility. They are the sole mechanism that allows for it.
Wait, really? How so?
Think about the mechanics of Wellington's position. He can only afford to wait for Napoleon's attack because he implicitly knows his own constants. He already knows the exact distances of the earth he is standing on. He knows the exact discipline of his men, that they will hold the line under cannon fire. He knows exactly how long his method and discipline will keep his army supplied.
So the 7 considerations create a bedrock of stability.
Exactly. Because Wellington knows his own foundation is flawless, when Napoleon makes an unexpected maneuver, Wellington has the mental bandwidth to instantly calculate a countermove.
Ah, it's like a master jazz musician. They can only improvise wildly on stage because they spent thousands of hours in strict, rigid practice mastering the underlying scales.
Precisely. If you haven't done the meticulous math beforehand, an unexpected move by the enemy doesn't spark a brilliant improvisation. It sparks widespread panic.
Right.
Wellington can solve the equation on the fly because he has already memorized all of his own variables.
Which brings us to the final unifying concept of the chapter. Because if your ultimate plan depends entirely on reacting to the actions of the enemy, then logically you must control what the enemy calculates.
You have to feed their spreadsheet.
Yes, you have to feed their spreadsheet. And that leads us to Sun Tzu's most famous, profound, and often misunderstood maxim, the grand illusion.
The realization of his entire thesis.
So what does this all mean? Sun Tzu writes, all warfare is based on deception.
It is a stunning, absolute statement. He doesn't say some warfare relies on tricks. He doesn't say deception is a useful tactical tool. He says all warfare is fundamentally built upon it.
Returning to the historical notes, Colonel Henderson observes that Wellington himself was especially distinguished by his extraordinary skill in concealing his movements, deceiving both friends and foes alike.
Yes, and Sun Tzu lays out the specific mechanics of this deceit through a series of brilliant dichotomies.
Let's hear them.
He instructs, quote, "When able to attack, we must seem unable. When using our forces, we must seem inactive. When we are near, we must make the enemy believe we are far away. When far away, we must make him believe we are near."
But how did ancient armies practically achieve that? I mean, how do you make 30,000 men seem far away when they are literally just over the ridge?
It required immense logistical effort. Armies would light hundreds of false campfires in empty valleys to simulate a massive force settling down for the night far away.
Oh,
Meanwhile, the actual strike force marched in total darkness with the hooves of their horses muffled with cloth to dampen the sound.
that is wild.
They would order soldiers to drag tree branches behind their chariots to kick up massive dust clouds, simulating a retreating army, while their infantry laid an ambush in the opposite direction.
So you are intentionally weaponizing data. You are manufacturing false variables. So the enemy general, sitting in his tent doing his 7 considerations, plugs the wrong numbers into his equation.
Yes, you want them to calculate that you are weak when you are actually at your strongest. But it goes beyond just physical illusion.
Right, there's a psychological component.
Huge psychological component. Sun Tzu advocates for highly targeted psychological warfare based on the enemy commander's personality. He says, quote, "If your opponent is of choleric temper, seek to irritate him. Pretend to be weak, that he may grow arrogant."
So you identify the fragile ego of the opposing general. If you know he is prone to anger, you send him an insulting, degrading message. Or you initiate a skirmish and immediately feign a cowardly retreat. You let his arrogance override his wisdom.
And you bait him into making a rash, uncalculated charge into your narrow pass. Wang Tzu uses a beautifully predatory analogy for this.
What does he say?
He says the good tactician plays with his adversary as a cat plays with a mouse, first feigning weakness and total immobility, letting the mouse believe it is safe, and then suddenly pouncing upon it when his guard is down.
You aren't just fighting their physical battalions, you're actively dismantling their psychology.
And this extends to how you dismantle the enemy's organization. There's a fascinating debate in the text translation regarding one of these tactics.
Oh, right, the translation debate. Sun Tzu's line translates literally to, if his forces are united, separate them.
Right. And a literal reading suggests physically dividing the enemy army on the battlefield, like using terrain or cavalry to split their vanguard from their rear guard.
But our sources note that there is a less plausible but heavily favored interpretation among Chinese scholars. They prefer to translate it as, if sovereign and subject are in accord, put division between them.
This highlights how deeply the scholars understood the earlier concepts.
Yeah.
Even if Sun Tzu originally meant physically separating troops, the later commentators recognized that breaking the enemy's moral law, putting political division between the ruler and his subjects, is infinitely more potent than splitting a physical army.
Right. You send spies into their cities. You start rumors that the general is plotting a coup against the king. You create paranoia so the king cuts the general's supply lines out of fear. You erode their internal harmony before a single sword is drawn.
Sowing political discord destroys the enemy from the inside out.
It's ruthless.
It really is. There is another revealing note regarding the line, if he is taking his ease, give him no rest. The commentator Ma Yaochen interprets it as, while we are taking our ease, wait for the enemy to tire himself out. But another source, the Yulan, argues it means to actively lure him on and tire him out.
So whether you are actively sending light cavalry to harass a resting enemy camp all night, or passively forcing an unwary enemy to march in circles chasing shadows while your own men sleep, the goal is basically asymmetrical expenditure of energy.
Exactly. You are manipulating the environment so they are exhausted while you are fresh.
The ultimate goal of all these devices is stated perfectly. Attack him where he is unprepared, appear where you are not expected.
And Sun Tzu attaches a crucial final warning to these tactics. He says, quote, "These military devices leading to victory must not be divulged beforehand."
Total operational security.
It requires more than just keeping the battle plan a secret from the enemy. It often requires keeping it a secret from your own men.
Wait, really? From your own men?
Think about it. To make an illusion airtight, to make a feigned retreat look genuinely terrified, your own soldiers often have to believe they are truly retreating until the very last second.
Oh, I see.
If the entire army knows it's just a trick, the acting gets sloppy. The secrecy must be absolute to maintain the deception.
As we reach the end of the chapter, Sun Tzu brings the entire philosophy full circle. He pulls us away from the dust of the battlefield and back to the quiet isolation of planning, the temple calculations.
Yes.
He states, quote, "Now the general who wins a battle makes many calculations in his temple ere the battle is fought."
And Chang Yu's note provides wonderful cultural context for this specific imagery.
I love this detail.
Yeah, he explains that in ancient times, it was customary for a temple to be set apart specifically for the use of a general who was about to take the field. The commander would go into this sacred space to elaborate his plan of campaign.
So it wasn't a noisy, chaotic war room filled with shouting officers.
No.
It was a religious space, a place for quiet, deep, isolated focus on the data. It elevates the act of calculation to a sacred duty, because the math is unforgiving.
Sun Tzu summarizes his entire thesis flawlessly here. He says, quote, "The general who loses a battle makes but few calculations beforehand. Thus do many calculations lead to victory and few calculations to defeat. How much more no calculation at all? It is by attention to this point that I can foresee who is likely to win or lose."
It is the ultimate vindication of rigorous preparation over passionate instinct. Many calculations lead to victory, none lead to disaster. It is that simple.
But, as we close, this raises a profound final thought. It is the core paradox of everything we've explored today, and is something I want you, the listener, to deeply consider.
Okay.
We have established that survival absolutely requires the meticulous, temple-like calculation of cold, hard facts, the 5 factors, the 7 considerations, the distances, the discipline, the weather. You must know the absolute truth of the board.
Right. You must perfect the spreadsheet of survival.
But we have also established, unequivocally, that all warfare is based on deception. You must constantly seem near when far, weak when strong, chaotic when disciplined.
Which means your enemy is doing the exact same thing to you.
Exactly. So if every general is sitting in their respective isolated temple, dutifully calculating the variables, but every general is simultaneously deploying spies, muffling horses, and feigning retreats to actively deceive everyone else about their strength and distance.
How can you ever trust the data you are calculating? The desperate search for absolute truth in a landscape built entirely on deception. That is the true, terrifying art of war. As you go about your day, we encourage you to take these principles with you. Think about the depth of harmony and alignment in your own organizations. Think about the rigorous discipline required to build trust, and that essential, terrifying flexibility needed to adapt when your perfect plan inevitably meets an unpredictable reality. The math is vital, but the map is never the territory. Thanks for joining us in the temple today.